Welcome to Revelation Unraveled. I'm your host, William Tapley, also known as the third eagle of the apocalypse and the co-prophet of the end times. This is the second program in my series on the unsealing of the prophecies of Daniel. And that refers to his last 6 chapters, which are the vision chapters. And we already looked at chapter number 7. And today we're going to unseal the prophecies of Daniel chapter number 8. And I am doing this on my new website, thirdeaglemedia.com, where you can download the files so that you can actually unseal the prophecies yourself. And I used to think I could do all of my co-prophecies on YouTube, but Jesus said you must read and understand Daniel. And that reading part you cannot do with my videos. And by the way, that also indicates that his prophecy was for the end times. Because at the time Jesus was addressing the crowds, very few of them could read. And in fact, it isn't until our own end times that the majority of people can read. And therefore, Jesus' prophecy is for you and me in these end times. And in fact, the angel tells Daniel that his prophecies are sealed up until the time of the end. And the only way you can understand the prophecies is to unseal them. And please don't listen to the false prophets who try to tell you that they can explain Daniel to you. They cannot do that because they do not know how Daniel sealed up his prophecies. And here is how he did it. First, you need to go to my new thirdeaglemedia.com website, and under Daniel Unsealed, chapter number 8, that's the chapter we are going to unseal on this program, download page 2 and 3 and attach them together. Now you can use a blue tape, but I did that for demonstration purposes. Cellophane tape is better. And once you have attached the 2 pages together, be sure to mount them on a piece of cardboard. I use simple grocery store cardboard for backing, and that firms up the 2 sheets of paper. Now let's take a closer look at how Daniel sealed up the prophecies in chapter number 8. There are 27 verses in Daniel chapter number 8. And he sealed up the prophecy by means of a hidden chiasm. And that means that verses 1 through 13 should be placed on the left side, and on the right side, verses 15 through 27 in reverse sequence. And at the bottom is verse number 14, which is a bridge verse between verse 13 on the left and verse 15 on the bottom right. And we know that this is how Daniel wanted these verses to be arranged so that we understand the prophecy, by having certain words repeat themselves. For example, in verse 1 and 2, the word is vision. He uses the word vision once in verse 1 and twice in verse number 2. And he repeats this same pattern in verses 27 and 26. The word vision is used once in verse 27 and twice in verse 26. This is how Daniel lets us know that these verses are meant to be lined up with each other. Now Daniel still must provide more verification, because you could arrange the 27 verses into 3 sets of 9 verses each. Therefore, he also verifies that 11, 12, and 13 are associated with verses 17, 16, and 15. And he does this again through repetition of various words. In this case, strength and continual sacrifice are repeated in verse 11 and 12, strength and continual sacrifice. But in verse 13, that pattern is reversed, continual sacrifice and strength. And he follows the same pattern in verses 17, 16, and 15. The words man and vision are repeated in verse 16, man and vision, and reversed in verse 15, vision and man. And therefore, we know the last 3 verses on the left side correlate to the last 3 verses on the right side. Therefore, we know that this is the only way that this chiasm can be arranged in Daniel chapter number 8. Now, in addition to arranging these verses according to a hidden chiasm, Daniel divides them into separate groupings according to subject matter. In other words, verses 1 and 2 and 27 and 26 are introductory and closing verses of the chapter. Then we have 6 verses, that is 3 through 8, which describe the ram-goat war. And then we have 5 verses, 9 through 13, which describe the Antichrist. Now, I used color coding here because he repeats some of these topics on the right-hand side. And I've used blue to indicate the ram-goat war, green to indicate the Antichrist, and red to indicate the opening and closing verses. Now, please remember this color coding and the underlining of various words are not meant to aid the prophecy, but rather simply here to show you how Daniel arranged this structure. And now the 4th color coding are these 5 verses which describe the conversation between the angel and Daniel, and I have these printed in black. And so on the right side we see a similar pattern to that on the left. 2 verses at top, 3 verses which describe the Antichrist, combined with 3 verses which describe the ram-goat war for a total of 6, and then 5 verses, as I say, a conversation between the angel and Daniel. And the meaning of this verse structure is, as we will find in all of Daniel's vision chapters, and that is that the Antichrist will be defeated by Mary's rosary. First of all, we have 2 verses on each side, which add up to 4, or in this case it could be 2 plus 2, which indicates humanity, followed by 6 verses on the left and 6 verses on the right, and of course 66 refers to the Antichrist, and they are followed by and therefore defeated by 5 verses on the bottom and 5 verses on the bottom right, and of course 55 indicates Mary's rosary. Now the single verse at the bottom, the bridge verse, verse number 14, which gives the timing of the events and which follows the reign of the Antichrist, symbolizes the millennium, or the 1,000 years of peace. Now, in addition to the verse structure having meaning itself, there is a great deal of emphasis on verse number 14, which is the hinge verse between the left side and the right side of the chiasm. And verse number 14 reads, "And he said to him, unto evening and morning, 2,300 days, and the sanctuary will be cleansed." Now, not only is it important because this gives the timing of this particular abomination of desolation, but the number 23 is a number of the Antichrist. And that is one reason we know that chapter number 8 is about the Antichrist. 23, as I have said many times, symbolizes 2 over 3, in other words, man over God, and 2/3 equals the decimal 0.666, which is the number of the Antichrist. Now, I believe the reason no Hebrew or Christian Bible scholar has ever been able to unseal Daniel is because it was not necessary until now in these end times. Now we know, for example, that there are 4 different abominations of desolation. They affect 4 different groups. They are instigated by 4 different individuals. And in chapter number 18, we now know that the Antichrist is the one who instigates this particular abomination of desolation, and his victims are the holy martyrs. And I have explained that on other videos. All I wanted to do on this program is to explain Daniel's hidden structure and how he sealed up the prophecies. So be sure to go to my thirdeaglemedia.com website, and you can download those 2 pages, connect them together, put them on a firm background, and then you can study how Daniel sealed up the prophecies, and you can understand them to your satisfaction much better. In fact, it's impossible to understand Daniel as printed in your Bibles because they are sealed up, as the angel told Daniel. And while you are on my website, if the Lord is directing you to contribute to my ministry, please hit the PayPal button. And just about every day, my web manager and I are updating and adding to and improving and changing our website. New material, ever since we set this up, has been added every day. But this is expensive, and it takes your support. And I appreciate everything you've done in the past, so please help us out if you can.